change of I don't know, of problem type, I guess, because so far we've been looking at data and just trying to say, you know, is this data point good or bad? Is this image an image of a lion or whatever it is we're trapping with our camera trap? And so those, we call those sometimes one-shot decisions, right? You get an input, you make a decision, and then you're done. And then you get a new input, you make another decision, again you're done. But we also have problems that are known as sequential decision-making tasks. That's where we make a decision, but that decision then changes the world in some way that affects our next decision. And then we make another decision, and again it has some effect on us. And so the classic case of those is when you're playing a game against someone else, right? You make a move in the game, that changes the state of the game. Then maybe your opponent makes a move, and changes the state, then you make another move, and so on. And so to achieve a successful outcome, you have to think about planning about future steps and not just looking at the one-shot decision. And the work I'm going to describe today was work on managing an invasive species in a river network in the United States, and was work with my former student, Majid Al-Qayyid-Talagan. I had another student, Sean McGregor, who worked with me on managing wildfires. And it turns out there are many, many management problems in ecology and in ecosystem management and many other things. I mean, self-driving cars, whatever, where you have these sequential decision-making tasks and you need to have some way of solving them. So the outline is going to be, I'll talk about our invasive species management problem and try to use that to give some intuition to the equations, because this is again going to be have a fairly technical parts to it, because there's a mathematical model called the Markov decision process, which is our standard model for describing these sequential decision-making problems. And then I'll talk about the scenarios, because the application depends a lot on what we know about the system. And finally, I'll describe some of the learning algorithms. Okay, so of course, human activity is influencing ecosystems worldwide, right? I mean, you know, 10,000 years ago, humans were relatively small, the populations were small, and we had a very small impact on the world. But now, we are having an impact on just everywhere on the planet, right? And so it used to be that we could sort of let nature take care of nature. We were just trying to survive. But now we're getting to the point where we really need to actively manage the ecosystems of the world. And that could be endangered species management or invasive species or preserving habitat that's important for a species and reserve design, wildfire management, many things like this. It's also important to remember that agriculture is itself a kind of managed ecosystem, right? When you plant a field of maize, you are then trying to manage that ecosystem so that the maize can succeed and not be overwhelmed by the weeds, by diseases. You have a question of water and so on and so forth. So lots of management decisions there. So how can we use data to solve these problems? That's the challenge. So an example problem is this problem of the tamarisk. So the tamarisk is a tree, and I don't know if it grows in Africa. It grows in the Middle East. And it's mentioned in the Bible in many places, very positively. That, you know, every man should have a tamarisk tree that he can sit under for shade, this kind of thing. But like a lot of very successful species, when you take it out of its original habitat and move it to a different habitat, like the United States, bad things happen because it is such a successful species. So these are tamarisk trees here, and they grow along rivers, and they propagate along river networks. And it turns out that this has invaded over 3 million acres in the United States, in the western US, and it outcompetes the native plants for water mostly. It sucks up the water out of the river. It competes against people for water, also in New Mexico especially. And so the question is really, what's the best way to manage this river ecosystem? So working with some natural resource economists, we developed a sort of mathematical model. So this is, you know, you can have models of different degrees of accuracy and faithfulness. This is what they call a stylized model. That is, it's not very accurate, But the hope was that we could understand by solving for optimal management in this mathematical model, get some insight about the real world. So we can treat a river network as a kind of tree structure, right? So we imagine the water is flowing down these branches of the river and out to the ocean, say this way. And we're just going to label these the edges, because we're computer scientists. So these are the edges. River people call these reaches. I don't know why, but so I may say that word by accident because I'm used to talking with them. But these are these edges, and each edge has a number of sites. We model this as, say, having 3 sites along each edge, and in each site is like a cell. You can have one plant growing in it. So this is a very, as I said, a very artificial model. And so we can either have, we imagine that there are just 2 species in the universe, native species, the Ns, and the T is the tamarisk. And so this would be a typical state of the river network. We have, here there's nothing growing. Here we have just one native tree, and we have that one tamarisk up in E2. And so, and then what are our management actions? Actually, there's a lot of research on what are good management actions. But one thing we could do is nothing, just let the system evolve the way it normally would. Or we could do the eradicate action. So if we applied the eradicate action in edge E2, we would try to kill that tamarisk tree. Maybe we'd hire someone to go cut it out and maybe burn it. Or we could plant a native plant. So we could go right here, for instance, and plant a native plant there. And we might plant the native plants just to, if we could fill all of these empty spots with native plants, that would help prevent the invader from getting established, because the invader really can't. The invader doesn't have a way of killing the native plant, it just has a way of occupying space and then competing. Or we could do both. We could do what they call a restoration action, go kill that tamarisk and plant a native plant there. And this is really based on a model that came out of, there's a very strong lab in mathematical ecology at Princeton University by Simon Levine, and this was one of his postdocs. Yes? No, usually you go in and physically remove it. Yeah. No, they don't use pesticides. They usually use a chainsaw or machete or something. And yeah, there's a big question about what to do with the tree after you've killed it. Like, should you burn it, or is it okay to just like compost it on the site, grind it up or something? And of course, you're working out in some remote place, so you can't really you usually get there by boat. So it's. Yes.